Welcome, everyone, to our seventh and final presentation in the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute 2026 at the U lecture series. I'm Laura Peterson, an OLLI volunteer. The Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Minnesota is a vibrant learning community for people aged 50 plus. Part of the College of Continuing and Professional Studies, OLLI belongs to a national network of Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes supported by the Bernard Osher Foundation. I'd like to acknowledge and say thank you to our sponsor, the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. We also acknowledge that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It is important to acknowledge the peoples on whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with our tribal nations. Today's presentation is entitled Encore Adulthood, Opportunities and Challenges with Dr. Phyllis Moen. Dr. Moen is a McKnight Endowed Presidential Chair and was Professor of Sociology at the University of Minnesota. She received her PhD in Sociology from the University of Minnesota. Professor Moen studies the effects of both organizational and technological shifts, such as how the aging of the workforce and COVID-19 affected employees' stress, well-being, and health at all life stages. Dr. Moen is currently investigating new ways of working, including the gendered effects of remote work, and is examining the effects of trials of a 4-day, 32-hour work week. Yay! She has written an award-winning book called Overload: How Good Jobs Went Bad and What We Can Do About It. Other award-winning books include The Career Mystique, Cracks in the American Dream, and Encore Adulthood, Boomers on the Edge of Risk, Renewal, and Purpose. Dr. Moen has served as president of the Interdisciplinary and International Work and Family Researchers Network, president of the Eastern Sociological Society, and director of the Life Course Center, an interdisciplinary NIA-funded Center on the Demography and Economics of Aging at the University of Minnesota. When Dr. Moen has concluded her remarks, OLLI's very own Dr. Kate Schaefers, the director of our OLLI program here, will have a short presentation, and I'll introduce her to you at that time. All right, Dr. Moen, I will hand this over to you.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you very much for your nice introduction. Let's see if I can do this here. Get this on. How about that? Good. I returned to the University of Minnesota in 2002, in part because of I had two grandsons living in Cokato, Minnesota, and wanted to be near them, as well as returning to my alma mater. I was invited soon after arriving to go to the Wright County Fair because my 12-year-old grandson, James, was going to show his chickens. His brother, who was aged 2.5, was quite bored with watching the judges evaluate the chickens. And I said, do you want to walk around and see other animals? Do you want to see goats, sheep, pigs? And he looked down and he said, camel. Well, being a good professor, I explained to him different categories of animals, that there were zoo animals and there were farm animals, and that you would see farm animals at the Wright County Fair, not zoo animals. I went on in great detail to explain that camels can be found in not only zoos, but in deserts, and went on and on talking. We turned the corner and there was a camel. I laughed out loud. Here I am, so smart, but William had been there with his dad before and had seen the camel. My point is that we have these categories in our heads. They're made up, but we believe that they're real and treat them as if they're real. And this is especially true about the conventional life course. We have socially expected expected timing of entrances, exits, and durations of work, of schooling, and of retirement. These are durable arrangements that organize experience over time, and they become the basis for how we see the world, how we think about the world, like I did about camels, and how we act towards it. So today my presentation is really based on a body of research over a number of years on work and the changing life course. What I came to see, I started out studying families and gender, women's lives, women's well-being, but I came to see that work was the overriding structure shaping both the life course and well-being, and especially around the time and timing, the clocks and calendars of work. So today I'm going to talk about the changing life course, about challenges related to Encore Adulthood, and as well as the opportunities. First, the changing life course. How did we get here? In the middle of the 20th century, there existed this lockstep life course of first childhood and adolescence related to schooling, and then conventional adulthood related to career building and family building, as well as old age. But in fact, the conventional adulthood was divided in two, in that the career building was a mostly male preoccupation and family building mostly female. So the mid 20th century lockstep life course was really the case only for white collar and unionized blue collar men. Women, minorities, people with low education could not follow the lockstep of full-time, full engagement in a single job or an orderly sequence of jobs up a career ladder. That was not available to them. But what matters is that this became the template. Just like I saw about farm animals and zoo animals, this became the expected life course. Old age was synonymous with retirement. And still in all the statistics that are put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 65 is seen as old age and as retirement years. But with the women's movement in the 1970s and 1980s, women also embraced this career mystique about working continuously and full time, but they did it the career mystique plus, and that they also added family care. And many found it impossible. So they scaled back at work, going to part-time hours, part year, less of a career focus, moving in and out of work, or they scaled back at home, delaying or foregoing marriage, motherhood, and increasing incidence of divorce. But so by the late 20th century, we had this lockstep life course being something for men and women. All adults in the household are working, and that is typically the case today during what's called prime adulthood, which is around 20, 25 to 50. These prime adult years, you're expected to remain in the workforce continuously and work continuously full time and be invested full time in your career. There was this myth of the unencumbered worker, that the ideal worker is somebody who's totally invested in their jobs and willing to go the extra mile, no matter what it is. But what happened is that women and men are not unencumbered, and they increasingly experience time deficits. So what we saw in research and writing in the newspaper was about work family or work life issues. How do we manage? How do and they gave mostly private solutions to what is seen as a private trouble. What you should do is make all the kids' lunches um, on the weekend and freeze everything. So, simple solutions like this picture of of the baby undoing the dishes, ways that you can create and deal with the time scarcity. Um, but and increasingly, it did become seen as a public issue, but is still not resolved. What we see today, from really 2000 on, is that we're living in times of hyper change, where the challenge isn't only the work-life, quote, balance or imbalance, but also an aging population and a um, new technologies that are problematizing work and the life course. Now, the aging population really became visible when the large cohort of boomers began turning 54, 55 around 2000. And what we've seen is a major increase in the proportion of people who are older working in the labor force as this giant tsunami of boomers age and move through their later working years. Also, extended life expectancy and medical advances are increasing the opportunities to work longer, as well as is increased education. But also, it's a time of increased automation, artificial intelligence, information and communication technologies. All these things are changing the world of work, together with a number of other things. Inflation, reduced safety nets. What do I mean by reduced safety nets? I mean getting less Social Security, reduced unemployment insurance, reduced welfare supports, so that you don't have a net under you should things go wrong. And what we're seeing is uncertainty, insecurity, ambiguity, and ambivalence, especially in what I call the emerging and encore adult years. So, what's happening is this unambiguous, unequal 21st century is creating an earlier life course. The scholars talk about emerging adulthood. As any of you who deal with or have children or grandchildren or neighbors who are children or grandchildren, know that people aren't moving into adult roles very quickly. And emerging adulthood is sort of between 18 and 30, a period of time where you're not a child, you're not an adolescent, but neither are you into adult roles of career building or family building. And often you may well be living at home for a period of time with your parents. So some people see this as a time of exploration, that you're trying out different relationships with different people, you're trying out different jobs. But others see it as a time of risk where you can't find the good job. You seem unable to find the right relationship. So emerging adulthood can be opportunity, but it's also risk and uncertainty. And that's lasting longer. So we're not moving directly from adolescence into adulthood. I myself became tired of the kinds of work that I saw both in research and in um, statistics from the Labor Department that would talk about people 50 and older, 60 and older, 65 and older. The and older was like they're all the same. And it's clear that we're not all the same in this large span of age that is getting longer with growing life expectancy and growing healthy life expectancy. So I coined the term encore adulthood for the period that's beyond the intense focus on career building and family building, but before the frailties that we associate with old age. So encore adults are not young, but they're not old either, despite how they're sometimes viewed. Nevertheless, these this old lockstep, like my idea of zoo animals and farm animals, is still there. People still see this as the way life is and should be. It's in our policies, our norms, and our expectations. So, policies, we may have postponed the full retirement age where you get Social Security, a full amount of Social Security, but the idea is still there that you continue to leave the labor force in one fell swoop and not return. We're not recognizing the changes that are occurring. Similarly, with childhood and adolescence, which we assume is education, we're not looking at education as a lifelong phenomenon. Now, there's a lot of people who talk about, oh, lifelong learning, but it's not in our policies and our practices to a great degree. Instead, it's embryonic, like what we're seeing in OLLI. So, what are the challenges of the changing life course, and especially the challenges for encore adulthood? The first challenge is that there are no roadmaps. It's a time of do it yourself encores. We see these bonus years of health and longevity, but they're not coming at the end of life. The bonus years where you're healthy and active are coming before the frailties of old age. And these are the encore years that we have that your parents or grandparents may not have experienced. They may have gone very quickly from career and family building to total role-less role of retirement and death without this period of time that creates opportunity for some, but challenges for others. It's a time of inequality between the advantaged and the disadvantaged, but also a time of uncertainty and ambivalence, and the absence of social structures that guide us through this life stage. So the challenge is that life is increasingly without templates or nets. No blueprints, no nets for emerging adulthood and encore adulthood, as well as an increasingly unconventional prime adulthood with loosely coupled career paths, increasingly not one major trip through the prime adult years. What do I mean by no nets? Think about unemployment insurance. You get unemployment insurance in most states if you have worked and left a full-time career job. So young adults, emerging adults who need to find a job and are maybe working part-time as restaurant servers or and other kinds of jobs that do not provide health insurance and who do not, and that do not provide uh, uh, do not qualify for unemployment insurance. So there's no blueprints there. The safety nets are based on prime adulthood where you're working full time. Similarly with Encore Adulthood, people may want to scale back to work part time, but if you're working part time, you have no safety nets of medical insurance. So that's what I mean with no nets. The second challenge is that this is a time of stress. Work, retirement, and the transitions between the two can be stressful, but it depends. So, what creates stress? Based on what I have learned over the years, I see stress is a result of the absence of control. And where does the absence of control come from? It's a misfit between what you need or what's expected of you and the resources that you have, this misfit. So, for instance, spiraling claims can be suddenly needing uh, uh, elder care. Suddenly you have both your job and caring for an older relative or a partner. The resources remain the same, but suddenly the claims and the needs extend, and this creates a problem of stress. So this is definitely true of caregiving and also say claims or needs that suddenly your grandson or son is in your basement. Career work itself can be stressful, too demanding, too rigid. The places I've studied, the companies I've studied, increasingly with new technologies expect you to be available 24/7. So you may be at your kids' or grandkids' basketball game, but you're expected to answer when texted or called or emailed. So the stress of and the stress of the changing technologies of work. Another source of stress and low control is when the needs may stay the same, but resources decline. So maybe you suddenly find you're older and can't do what you could do, or that you are unwilling to expend that amount of resources in that way. So you have claims remain the same, but the resources are not there. The death of a spouse may reduce your resources. And we see this in what happens with retirement. So if you ask people who are working, encore adults, what when do they expect to retire? Often they'll say it's a dark blue, uh, never, or at age 70 or beyond. So they tend to think they're going to retire a lot later, but actually, people uh, retire a lot younger than they expect. In the 1980s, the late 70s and 80s, people were retiring around 62 or 63, even though they expected they would retire a lot later. Now it's closer to 65. But, and we can talk about this, retirement itself is now a contested concept. What do we mean by retirement? Retirement itself can have negative effects on health and well-being in terms of some studies. Now, let me just say, if you ask retirees what are the words they associate with retirement, and if you ask older workers what are the words they associate with retirement, it's things like freedom. Freedom is the biggest word. Opportunity, leisure, they see it as positive, in a positive term. But some studies show, and this is an example, that after retirement, you have a 5 to 16% increase in difficulties associated with mobility and daily activities, a 5 to 6% increase in illness conditions, and a 6 to 9% decline in mental health over an average post-retirement period of 6 years. Now, why does this happen? It tends to operate through lifestyle changes, including declines in physical activity and social interactions. So we see um, a, a decline in the claims and needs on our time, and therefore we're not doing those physical activity. We're not being physically or socially engaged. Moreover, being fully retired or unemployed was associated with higher levels of psychological distress compared to being in paid work for men and women. So it's not the retirement status passage that matters. What matters is what you do after you leave that career job, including whether you are sitting in the recliner or on the couch. There's a third challenge as well, and that's what I call structural lag and inertia. So the policies, the practices, our ideas about work, retirement, encore adulthood, the life course are all outdated. And we need new institutional and organizational arrangements, new social inventions to support alternative and sustainable life course paths for men and women at all life stages. The reality is that all these changes we're experiencing, the hyper changes, are affecting the realities of structural lag. Higher education continues to focus on the 18 to 22 age group. And if you don't believe me, look at any brochure from any institution of higher education. Government and corporate policies remain predicated on this lockstep linear career path and one-time, one-way retirement exits. These are all examples of cultural and structural lag. Boomers and Gen Xers want to work, to volunteer, to give back to their communities, but find no clear paths for doing so. Most older workers, their choices remain full-time, often inflexible career paths, or full-time leisure. There are few institutionalized options in between. So unpaid family care work and community service are both not counted and discounted. So we don't really have a measure of how much family care work is done or how much community service is done. And if there's one thing that we know about government and about policy, is that what's counted matters. If it's not counted, it doesn't matter. And these two things are not counted. Example of structural lag. So this is most workers plan to work after they retire, but notice that 37% expect to work part-time. But there are no really institutionalized good part-time jobs with paid vacation time, with medical insurance, and they're just not institutionalized in the way that full-time work is. So this is a lag. People want part-time jobs, but often they end up not working in Encore Adulthood, in part because they can't find the part-time or part-year jobs they would prefer. So what we're seeing is institutional inertia. We can't do anything. As this cartoon shows, the Wright brothers, you can't go anywhere because there are no airports. And you may have the plane, but there are no airports. So we're going to look at opportunities now, because times of disruption offer the potential to redesign our lives. Times of stress, uncertainty, that is true, but it's also possibility for reimagining and reworking timetables, clocks, calendars in ways that promote engagement, growth, a sense of control, and life quality. I'm going to talk first about opportunities for personal reinvention in the Encore Adulthood. Well, how we ourselves can deal with the uncertainties of Encore Adulthood. The first strategy is self-reflection, challenging your own ingrained mindsets, your uncertain identity. Who are you? What are you? What do you want to be? You have ingrained in your heads, as most people, this lockstep life course. You've taken it as reality when it's socially constructed. Retirement as a role-less role. We're assuming that retirement is just on the edge of the life course and that people die soon, and it's not really having any sense of purpose or meaning, and certainly not meaningful engagement. So we need to reflect on our own mindsets, how these ideas, these categories get in our heads and shape our own thinking, our own sense of what is possible. For instance, and one can work for these things, recognizing that boomers and Gen Xers and all of their co-workers, all of us want more flexibility, control, and options to shift down or even scale up in meaningful work, not necessarily drop out. So how do we work for and encourage more career development in career jobs, more second, third, and fourth careers, more schooling, sabbaticals, and other timeouts, as well as, and what we're seeing at all ages, is less of a focus on engagement with being the unencumbered full-time worker, but also focus on families, friends, health, one's passions, and civic engagement, that it's not all about work. The second thing we can do is deliberately select what to keep, what to get, and what to let go. Laura Carstensen is a psychologist who has talked about time horizons, how we let go of some relationships as we grow older and see, I have a limited time horizon left. Do I really want to spend time with this, quote, friend who causes me no degree of anxiety or stress? Who do I want to spend time with? Well, Laura Carstensen's idea can be extended to other activities and experimenting with engagement, trying out different things. And in this, I would say experimenting is key. You know, in one study we recently did, we found that people who are in 50 to 69 moved over a space of 16 months. 1/4 of those moved in and out of the workforce or in and out of part-time or full-time work. Over 1/4 did this, what we call churn, that we see with young adults. They move in and out of jobs, but this is happening later too, as people are trying to find what works for them, including learning, going back to school, finding ways of continuing to grow. This socio-emotional selection is one needs to be active in doing it and be willing to fail. Failing is good. Failing is good in that you say, no, this isn't for me. So what I did, I read somewhere that it's important to keep learning and growing. So I got my grandson, who's now the 2-year-old is now 25, his a keyboard, and I was going to learn to play. Well, that lasted about a week, and I decided that's not for me. So, but we learn what we don't want to do as well as we want what we want to do by experimenting. And we see this that people are voting with their feet. The employment rate has nearly doubled from 1985 to 2024 for those 65 and older. So it was close to 10% in 1985, close to 20% today. So one thing people are doing is working longer or finding bridge jobs. And they are enrolling in higher education in unprecedented numbers. We see this again from just 2000, how it's increased. As people see they have longer lives and more options, and they want to continue to grow. So what do we know about Encore Adulthood and shaping our own life paths through this new life stage? First is that these are the unstandardized bonus years. They're bonus, but they're unstandardized. And so we have constrained choices. You may want to do one thing, but find there are no options. And so you have to work around the constraints. Second is there's no blueprints. So the lesson is there's no one way or one right way of being. That opens up a great deal of latitude. Third is that these are opportunities and challenges in this life stage, so one must do it yourself, but that means actively taking control of your life. Encore adulthood is a time of liminality. And if you look up liminality, what it means is betwixt and between. You're neither this nor that. And what we see in Encore Adulthood is there's no commonly shared sense of what Encore Adulthood should be, no ideal model of a good encore. And yet this is the last major life stage before frailties, so we need to exploit and make the most of it. Still, Encore Adulthood is uncharted territory. So can we promote social inventions to promote encore capacity, health, and life quality? I see 3 avenues for change with the federal government, with state governments, and with communities, and especially with organizations. One is to reframe the expected timing and durations of work, including not so big jobs. This is something I found in my research. People want a not so big job. I don't want to be invested in working all the time, 24/7. Excuse me. And as well as greater employee control over work days, work weeks, work years, career paths, and retirement. In a major study we did of a high-tech company and nursing homes, we found that giving people more control over the time and timing of their work reduced the stress and improve their well-being, as well as improved their longevity. Not longevity, included improve their odds of remaining longer with the employer rather than leaving through retirement or through dropping out of their jobs. The second major challenge is legitimated timeouts at work, paid leaves, vacations, and time ins for education, training for those at all life stages. With AI, with the changes that are going on in the workforce and in the labor market, we all need more education and training. And we need to have that institutionalized. Moreover, with timeouts, when studying the workers, contemporary workers, what I've found is that many do not take vacations at all, or if they do, come back early or bring work with them and work during their vacation. So we need to sort of step back from that work as everything and the total factor encompassing our lives, to step back to make work more reasonable. The third avenue for change is flexible career paths, possibilities for second, third, or fourth acts in community service, in employment, with grandchildren. How do we institutionalize that? Plus, we need social insurance and skill upgrades for the risks and the transitions inherent in a turbulent world. Now, what do I mean by social insurance? I mean really some kind of financial underpinning in times of stress, like unemployment has been and served well for full-time workers who were laid off. But how do we provide those kind of supports at different life stages when you can't find a job? When you want a part-time job but need to work longer, but there are no jobs, when you need skill upgrades, how do we offer these kinds of changes? So the 21st century challenge is how to remove time constraints and open up possibilities for women and men at all stages of the life course. I've used the word social inventions, and I just want to talk about social inventions. We're used to technological inventions, but what are social inventions? So the GI Bill was a social invention. The Fair Labor Standards Act was a social invention. The Peace Corps is a social invention. Land grant colleges and universities, Medicare, Social Security. I'm currently studying new social inventions in terms of the 4-day work week. Can we move to, instead of the taken for granted category of 5 days and 40 hours, can we move to 4 days and 32 hours with full pay? And what are the consequences of doing so? The life course, Matilda White Riley in the 1980s talked about we need not an age differentiated, first education, then work, and then the leisure of retirement, which is on the left of the screen, but an age integrated life course where you can have education, some kinds of work, some kinds of leisure throughout the life course. But this is too small and too constraining, I feel. We also need to include family and personal development, community engagement, and just try to time for self and personal development. The Wright brothers, again, people will always say, we can't do things, it's impossible. But the real way to move forward is to create the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moen. That was fascinating. Next up, we have Dr. Kate Schaefers, who's director of the University of Minnesota's OLLI program, with a few remarks.
Thank you so much. And I just want to start off by saying I have had the great privilege of working with and being mentored by Professor Moen. And I think a lot of her work has shaped the work I'm doing here at the university. So I just want to say a big thank you. And it was wonderful to listen in on today's presentation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of the concepts that Professor Moen talked about and talk about how we're trying to bring them into practical applications here at the University of Minnesota. So I'm going to share my screen here. And let me go to PowerPoint. All right, so you should all be able to see that. Let me know if you don't. So, as Professor Moen talked about, we are lacking roadmaps for how to navigate longer lives. So, we know we're living longer. We have this encore adulthood stage where they're role-less roles. We don't really know how to navigate what's going on. And what we know is that people need and want support as they go through these transitions because a lot of times it's do it yourself. People want to work longer years, but with more flexibility, with more intention. And they're also looking for more opportunities to learn throughout the life's course at every stage of life. And they're not always finding those opportunities. And so I'm going to mention, first of all, the life transitions piece, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the lifelong learning. But we are recognizing that higher ed can be an amazing place to experiment with these roadmaps and creating these roadmaps for people in that second half of life. And I'm going to mention just this organization, the Nexel Collaborative, which is a global alliance of leaders in higher ed that are exploring and starting and running programs that are focused on how people can transition at midlife and to beyond into what's next. I'm actually co-leading this organization, and it is a wonderful way to look at normalizing this process of coming back to a college campus, taking courses, or getting involved in college as a way to plan your what's next. And I do think universities can be ideal places for this. For one thing, we are really well positioned to help people launch careers. As Professor Moen said, college is built around the 18 to 22-year-old phase when people are looking at developing skills, getting expertise, and going into the workplace. Um, but the questions that 22-year-olds are asking, we are finding people in their 50s, their 60s, and 70s are also asking, like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? What skills do I have that the world needs? What kind of training should I be looking at that is going to help me get to where I want to be next? They're exactly the same kinds of things. And the infrastructure that we've built around the 18 to 22-year-old need to launch a career is also very similar to what's needed for and can be retrofitted for people in Encore Adulthood. And I also want to put in the middle here, a lot of universities, including the University of Minnesota, have emphasized ways that people can come back and learn more shorter skills so that they can upskill, reskill, develop skills for the next level of position they want. So we have a whole bunch of courses and certificate programs and badges around things that help people develop an expertise, develop a credential so that they can further their career. So again, universities can really help people across the life course navigate, whether it is launching a career, and that's kind of how we've been built, to moving within your career or starting new careers, but re-careering, and then also Encore Adulthood. All three of these stages are universities can focus on them. So I want to mention specifically the Midlife Academy at the University of Minnesota. So we started the Midlife Academy in last fall, so it's a very new program. And our whole intent with this is to help people navigate these career and life pivots. As Professor Phyllis Moen said, we've got people who are looking for work, but they're looking for different ways of working. They may be looking towards retirement, but they're not necessarily looking for fully stepping out of the workplace. They're navigating caregiving responsibilities and maybe needing to downshift what they're working on. So, giving people the support and what they need as they're navigating what's next, that's really the intent of what we're doing with the Midlife Academy. And so, some of the themes that we focus on with this is, understanding the process, as Professor Moen has said, that our infrastructure, our structures are not necessarily geared towards these kinds of transitions. So understanding what's going on with transitions, how do we navigate these things, being intentional about the choices we're making, identifying ways to have an impact, crafting experiments. Professor Moen mentioned that, trying some things out. If you fail, so be it. That's learning as well. And getting support and accountability as people make these kinds of transitions. And the way that we are envisioning this program, and we have succeeded with this, is we are really focused on the idea of bringing people together as a cohort. We know that community can really help people get focused in what they're looking at next, and get the support they need. For a lot of us, when we're thinking about doing something different, we get stuck at the point of thinking through things through our head, but it's hard to take steps to do it. And there is something really powerful when people start talking about ideas and maybe do it with a little quiver in their voice because they're not quite sure if it's feasible. But when they start talking about something they would really like, to have people reflect it back, to support them, to maybe introduce them to people in their networks who might be able to give people information about pursuing a path. But there's something really powerful when you bring people together at a similar life stage who can talk about, how they might want to explore something different and just get the support and the networks and the accountability and collective wisdom and just all of the things that happen when you do this in a group. So we have courses that focus on group experiences. Right now, and we're still early in this process, there's two courses that we're offering. One is called Cultivating Purpose. We kind of, for shorthand, call it Finding Your Why. So it's being intentional about what you really want, what's important to you at this life stage. And then the second one is Next Chapter Reset, Creating Momentum. And this is kind of shorthand of Find Your Way Forward. So coming up with some of those practical steps for shifting into something new and getting this, both of them are getting the support from a community, a cohort of people. We also know this is a really new concept for most people out there that, that because you're doing it yourself, that, the idea about coming back to campus for some of this. So we have a podcast, we do webinars. So there's just a lot of opportunities to get some information about, what's going on, to learn some things. Our most recent podcast that we had that just came out was on caring for the caregiver. And again, we know this is a big issue for people at midlife and beyond, and whether it is navigating through the work that people are doing while caregiving. I love the visual of Professor Moen of the person climbing the ladder with all of the things hanging on to that person. But how do you navigate that? But then it's also we know that for some people they've stepped out of the workplace for caregiving and then trying to get back in is not easy. And so we've got a lot of resources around that. And these are webinars. You can just check them out on our website. And I do want to say it's really exciting that we're getting some press coverage around the need for this. And I know Professor Moen's been talking about this for a long time about, we need to build some infrastructure around these transitions. We need roadmaps. We need to rethink the way that we've organized our systems. But I do think we're getting some traction, at least in the press around this. And I'm really excited. There's a new book out called Longevity Nation, and we are included in that. So that's pretty exciting as one of the examples of a university approach. So that is all about the transition piece of it. I also want to talk about, and I know Professor Moen talked about this, of this lifelong learning, that learning has to happen across the lifespan. And I think one of the really powerful resources for lifelong learning within our community is the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. Our sponsor, along with with the Alumni Association, around this idea that coming together for learning is really a powerful way to stay engaged and to get fulfillment and meaning in our lives as we age. And so OLLI is just a great place to do that. We offer hundreds of non-credit enrichment courses a year, special interest groups, volunteer opportunities. And if you're not from Minnesota, that's fine. Well, we do have online courses, so you certainly could check us out from that perspective. But there's 123 OLLIs across the U.S. There's an OLLI in every state, so it's something that may be close to home as well. And again, every OLLI runs a little differently. I mean, we're all unique in that sense, but it is this shared idea of both lifelong learning and this joy of learning, but also coupled with this sense of community, which again, both are really important as we age. And I just grabbed a couple of courses that we had this spring. These are some of our favorites, but and everything from art theft in the FBI, which was a really fun, popular class, to music, to birding, to visits to home and field. Again, think like a hacker. Some things are practical, some things are just for pure enjoyment. Technology of World War II. So it's almost all of our courses are volunteer led. So it is a fun way for people to come together and explore topics of interest. So I'm gonna escape from this right now and quit sharing my screen. Let me just stop sharing and let's open up to questions.
Well, thank you, Kate. I can certainly second everything you've said about Ollie. It has truly been incredibly life enriching for me in the last 6 years. I've met amazing people and I've learned some cool, awesome things. And it's just fun every quarter to get the catalog. I can't wait to see what it's going to offer next. And maybe if the listeners already know this, but there's no homework, there's no tests. It's just wonderful and fun learning. So, Kate, we do have a question, I think, for you. How
Okay.
can people learn where ollies are in other states?
There is a website that the national organization, the NRC. I will look that up and put it in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question, someone is interested in receiving the slides from your presentation, Dr. Moen. Are you open to sharing that with us or no? What are you thinking?
Absolutely. And in fact, I believe it's going to be posted, isn't it, Kate? The presentation will be posted.
The recording will, yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. While we're waiting for other questions to come in, and if you have some questions, it would be really helpful if you let me know when you're asking them in the Q&A feature who you would like me to ask the question of, Dr. Schaefers or Dr. Moen. That would be great. So, Dr. Moen, are you aware of any corporations in this country that are trying to put into place some of the concepts that you've talked about? I know that other countries are actually maybe moving forward with different legislation, but in this country, I would imagine that's a little bleak right now.
Well, that's an excellent question, Laura. And I'm just now reading a book that's about how organizations respond to an aging workforce, both in the United States and Germany. And as you can imagine, Germany is more proactive. The organizations there are proactive in part because of the structure, the culture of the of the society, which gives worker voice and labor unions um, um, more of a say in what's going on. What these authors found is that the idea of focusing on older workers is not an issue that's at the top of any leaders' agendas in the U.S. and or major companies, but however, it is very much an issue for supervisors who are dealing with retirement and loss of knowledge and skills and concerns. In our research, we've studied a number of corporations where we've tried to focus not on age or not on gender, but on how do we make uh, improve work quality for everyone. And what we found is companies take on these ideas of more control, more flexibility, greater latitude, and it works very well. And then a new CEO comes in, and we've got to work and do things my way. So things don't stick. But you know what gives me hope, Laura, is that uh, people have always said, "Oh, we can't change anything," and yet during the pandemic, we saw people who said, "Oh no, you can never work remotely," figure out how their employees could work remotely. So I think that as the aging of the workforce becomes more of a reality, there are fewer young people entering, um, that they're going to modify how we do things. And we see increase in flexibility, increased in uh, options for exiting your career jobs, and some rehiring of their retirees. So there are possibilities for change.
Excellent. One more quick question for you from me. I think that I read several years ago about a study, not a study, a trial basically in, I believe, the United Kingdom on the 4-day work week.
Yes.
And I think that it was a success, but I don't even know how that term was defined. Are you aware of that trial? I'm sure you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Our work is part of this larger international collaborative of people trying, and the 4-day work week is a lot more popular in European countries than it is in the US. But we did a study of companies in the US and Canada, and finding it's usually smaller or corporations that are willing to do it, and they're doing it for recruitment and retention. I mean, oftentimes corporations say we're doing it things to promote, work-life fit, or we're concerned about the health of our workers, but mostly they're concerned with recruitment, retention, and the bottom line. And they're finding that people work more efficiently and effectively when they're given this extra day off, and they come back more refreshed from having the time off. So I think that this is an idea whose time is on the near horizon.
Thank you. Also, just to quickly mention, I know that Kate put into the chat the website for the National OLLI Foundation, which you can go to find out more about those OLLI programs. So be sure to check out that chat feature and you can find the link there. Okay, so are there any resources for seniors to find volunteer opportunities? I don't know if that question is pertinent to specifically one or both of you, so either one is able to answer. That would be great.
I have a couple of thoughts, but Phyllis, do you?
No, I just give an example, just say this is an example of how it's not institutionalized, that people want to volunteer, but it's not really as easy to figure. There's no place that one can go like you can looking for a job. So we need to improve that. But there are some places, and Kate's going to tell you about them.
Mhm. Yeah, there's some websites where you can put in what you're looking for and find volunteer opportunities in your community or virtually, because there's a lot of nonprofits that do that. I definitely recommend checking those out. Here in Minnesota, we have a hands-on Twin Cities. There's also hands-on websites. Volunteer Match is another one. But I also think that for a lot of people, they're looking for specific ways to volunteer using their skills. And I think that's the hard part is getting those kinds of opportunities, getting in front of the right person. And sometimes it may be you start in some kind of role and then migrate within that organization. I would also say organizations that you're already part of are oftentimes great places. I know that and I'll give OLLI as an example, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. There's so many ways to volunteer for us. And, one way, and I know one of the questions that has to do with this is that, deciding to teach a class is a great way to not only learn yourself and put together those components, but then also to engage with a group that is interested in something you're also interested in. And so involving, you know, getting involved in ways like that is a great way. And with OLLI too, because almost all of our course leaders that teach for us are volunteers. I mean, we do hire some graduate students as part of our commitment to graduate education and intergenerational learning, but most of our people are coming with proposals of something that they're fascinated by and they want to teach a class based on that, whether it's in their field or not. For some, it's, we get retired professors teaching for us, and it's amazing their expertise that they bring. Others, it's someone with a passion that just wants to learn, and teaching is a great way to learn something.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that sometimes it's not just going to where you can use your skills, but to be open to other opportunities. Kate and I both know someone who was a high level uh, executive, knew accounting, et cetera, and decided she was going to get involved in a nonprofit, helping them with their budget and 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 everything like that. She hated that, but they were teaching younger people to read, and she loved that. And she stopped helping with the accounting and worked as a facilitator of young people's reading, and said she'll do that as long as she's able in her life. It was so rewarding.
Yeah, and there are programs, whether it's AmeriCorps, which is a big commitment, but a wonderful commitment where you do literacy programs, or AARP has some really great opportunities to volunteer with literacy. But yeah, there's so many ways. I think part of it is maybe stepping back to and thinking about what is it you're looking for from a volunteer experience and getting clear on that. And just, are you looking for a social outlet? Are you looking for, being able to be a strategic influence on something you care about? And so really getting involved with advocacy work, or, trying to connect on that level. Are you looking for, something that it's you go, you show up, and then you leave? Like I know one of my friends, she recently volunteered, but she loves the fact that she's been volunteering with an organization that distributes diapers in our community to people in need. She loves she can show up, pack boxes, and then leave. It's like, and she's made friends there. And so it's like, what is it you want out of the volunteer experience? And then there's ways that you can find those kinds of roles, but it might also take some networking within those organizations.
That's good advice. I have a few friends who retired and then, in fear of being bored, kind of splattered themselves across many, many organizations and volunteered, and then were kind of miserable because they were doing things they didn't want to do for organizations they weren't that interested in. So,
Yeah.
yes, definitely think it through before you get out there. Okay.
Yeah.
So Kate, you were talking a little bit earlier about how we have some retired professors who teach, and we have some graduate students who we pay for to teach. But on the topic of money, do we offer any free courses? I think I know the answer, but this might be an opportunity to talk about some of our reduced fee
Yes.
samplers.
Yes. So I will say we do offer some free programming. This series is one of those. So the OLLI at the U, we do have our members sign up for this, but also there's community people who are participating in it. We do have a sampler event coming up in August, which is again like little mini lectures. So we do that. We do some free work, but we also, I want to emphasize we have scholarships. We're very supportive of not having um, that our course our fee to join be a barrier. So if our fee is a barrier, we invite you to apply for a scholarship. We're very supportive of that, and our members we fundraise around it, and our members are very supportive of that as well. Um, yeah. And so, like, again, we will occasionally offer things and we sometimes will do partnerships actually. So, we've got some organizations, like we do partnerships with Ramsey County Library around a curriculum, two curricula, a Great Decisions curricula. And then they have a program called Tuesdays with a Scholar, and we cross publicize those things. And, those are opportunities to also have some free programming.
Great. Okay, the question for Dr. Moen, do you have any suggestions for Encore Adulthood self-study?
Pardon me, what was the word? Self-study?
Self-study. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think just stepping back and questioning what one believes, what just taken for granted, especially around what one is capable of, but as Kate said, what one wants to do. What do you want to do? How do you want to spend your time? And I would say maybe the biggest thing is getting rid of the shoulds that
Mm.
are embedded in how we think about activities and timetables, and that I should be doing this or I should be doing that, because this is really bonus years. These are bonus years. So looking inside, um, another way of self-study, I would think, would be to find the people who are doing what you want to do, who are being what you want, and interviewing them,
Mm.
learning how they got there, what they're doing, what they like, what they don't like. So both experimenting and investigating what others are doing is a great way. And let me say also, self-reflection isn't enough, because we can do this forever. We can keep reflecting, well, do I want to do this or I do that? I would say jump in, try things, experiment.
I'd wholeheartedly agree with that. And that, we can get stuck trying to find the perfect fit for us. And so trying to say, what is it that, what are my values? What is important to me? What skills do I have? And just really fixate on trying to reflect. But the best way to do this is, think, but then act. And don't wait too long. And then act and then think. So like don't like you can kind of you can get a direction, a general direction, try it out, recalibrate, try it out, recalibrate, and know that it's not going to be like a one-time thing, and don't wait to have it all figured out before you act.
Good advice. Well, we do have a suggestion here for an OLLI course. Someone is suggesting we have a course on how to prepare to serve on a nonprofit board because many small nonprofits have a continuing need for that. So
Mhm.
maybe the curriculum committee could
Yeah, that's a great idea.
take that one on. Yes. Let's see. And then we have another person who is wondering if OLLI could look into teaching courses for people who want to maintain their professional licenses but are retired. In this particular case, it's a nurse, but I don't know. That maybe is a more complex undertaking. It's
Yeah,
something.
I mean, I think if we're talking about credentialing classes to keep a license, I'm not sure that OLLI would be the right place for that, but we certainly are a place where, there's if people want to continue to take classes that might still have relevance, I'm just not sure if it would qualify. Like we have a number of our courses have to do with, like we've had a course on Tibetan medicine and, just around things that might be related to health wellness that might be interesting to someone with a background in healthcare. But it's not necessarily going to be a credentialing just because we don't have, that capability.
I think it's continuing education maybe is a better term for what this person was suggesting, but
Yeah.
yes. Let's see. With people who are saying thank you very much for the session, so I just wanted to make sure I passed that along. Um, we don't have any other outstanding questions at this point, so please, if you do have anything that you want to ask, now is your time. Um, Someone here says they took oh, Tibetan medicine. Um, might have been this is this person who also asked the question about continuing ed for people who are licensed. Let's see, there's a great organization that focuses on training and supporting nonprofit boards and leaders called Propel Nonprofits.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And I do believe um, they have training. That's a great suggestion. Propel is a great nonprofit. And I think it's just propel.org
Propel, okay.
is would be my guess.
Yeah, good.
Oh no, it's not.
No. What is the name? Or you're still,
Propel for nonprofits.
oh, okay.
Propel, PROPEL, nonprofits.org.
Okay.
So
All right.
yes. And they are in Minnesota again, if we have people from out of state. There's
Okay.
probably a similar kind of organization in your
Sure.
state that also offers these, or they may be on Zoom. I'm not sure.
Okay, someone is asking if you join OLLI in one state, can you take classes in another state?
Yeah, unfortunately, no. Each OLLI operates within its own system. I mean, I will say though that we sometimes will share presenters, and so we have many presenters who come and speak at many OLLIs, and some of them are really popular, you know, accomplished folks that are willing to do several of them. Um, the if you're looking for an experience where you have in person and on Zoom, your local OLLI is the best option. We also have some programming that comes out of our national organization that some of the OLLIs engage with. But also many of our OLLIs have a pretty robust Zoom curriculum, so you could certainly become a member and take classes through any of our OLLIs that have that.
Do either one of you know how many, uh, I don't know the term, maybe senior students take classes at the U, those over 62 who are eligible for the non-paying tuition for those courses?
Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about what that program is. It's at the University of Minnesota. It's called the Senior Citizen Education Program. And it is part of our land grant legacy that the legislature has, we have legislation around Minnesotans 62 and older can audit many classes for free or take them. Today, I think it's $20 a credit. Many land grant universities have this provision. People register after traditional age students, so it is really on seats available, but the University of Minnesota has so many courses and opportunities that we do have people who participate in that, and actually some folks earn degrees through that program. Um, this may not be an exact number in any sense, but I have heard before that about 500 people a year do that program, and they, take anywhere from an enrichment class, something they're interested in. The thing you have to keep in mind is that you'll be in the classroom with traditional age students, which that's wonderful. I mean, a lot of older adults just that's their goal and they really love it, but you'll also be doing a lot of the work. You'll be using the platforms. It's usually a 16-week class. So you're making that kind of a commitment. But if that's what you're wanting to do, it is a great opportunity to do that and experiment with the kinds of classes that maybe you didn't get to take when you were an undergrad. I know for some people they might take a music class or take, I know one of our OLLI instructors, a very popular one, is taking film class and he loves it. And so I think that it's a great way to dive into something, but it is a deeper dive. I mean, your 16-week semester class, you're going to be like using platforms like Canvas to get readings and it is a bigger commitment, but it's a great commitment if you're game for it.
I think that there is also some research being done on the benefits to both the traditional college age group and older adults mingling and getting to know each other and sharing their experiences and their knowledge in those kind of courses,
Yes. You
which
know,
may
when
also be, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so Phyllis and I worked with a program that doesn't exist anymore, which was very intentionally intergenerational. And we heard such wonderful feedback from the traditional age students about how helpful it was to have these intergenerational discussions. And if you think about it, like, we had one, and this was through OLLI actually, we had some OLLI participant or OLLI members participate in a freshman class about social activism and being able to link the women's movement and some
Mm.
of the women who were very active in that from our OLLI group with what some of the young adults were trying to do in their class was really an interesting way to bridge generations and understand that there were so many similarities across that. And then Phyllis had taught a class called The Future of Work and Life in the 21st Century. And I remember one of the undergrad students said something like, it was really helpful to talk with people who actually have work experience when we're talking about the future of work. And, just even learning about like what was work like in the 80s, like, my first job, or like how different it was. And just also, I think having that tremendous respect for what young adults are living through today and the challenges of getting
Yes.
that first job.
Yes, and what one of the young people responded, and talking about the person that was mentoring him, that he doesn't know what he's going to do either. So that there's this shared uncertainty about the future. And in fact, that's one thing that if people don't want to get involved in formal volunteering programs, I would say something that's most rewarding is to begin to mentor this younger generation, these emerging adults who are having a really tough time and seeing around the corner of their futures, and just to be an adult in their lives that may not be a family member, but someone else is a great idea.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm reminded of Arizona State has a program right now. I don't even know how it started, but it's some of their older adults that are part of a community there are just going to sit on a bench with a sign of "Come talk to me." And the number of young adults just walking by campus and just sitting down and, the hugs that happen and just the love that happens is just, I know. And sometimes a lot of these young adults, they're all, and I don't want to say just young adults, but they're on their phones and they're not interacting with each other. And then here's someone sitting here saying, "Hey, come talk to me." The students that are taking advantage of that are really valuing it.
Maybe some of the movement or some of the thoughts that are also behind the movement of building alumni housing on college campuses where, yeah, adults want to go back and live in that environment and students appreciate the interaction. And I get a little bit goosebumpy when I think about that. I think that's a
Yes.
lovely idea.
Yes. And I do want to say too, the mentoring is definitely, I mean, I think young adults can really benefit from even like the social capital that older adults have, because older adults oftentimes they have connections in the workplace. They kind of know how to navigate some of our corporate systems and to be able to guide them. But the mentoring goes the other way as well. And it's not just technology. It is just understanding worldviews and understanding just what it's like to be a young person today. And so I think when you get those relationships happen, it might start as, a mentoring with an older adult having something to share, it ends up being mentoring that goes both ways. And that is a really beautiful experience.
That is, and this is a wonderful place to end our discussion today. And this whole topic has just been fantastic for the last session. I think it wraps up a lot of the things we talk about in our previous presentations, and I just know the audience has been very grateful for all this information. So thank you so much, Dr. Moen, for all of your insight, and thank you to the audience as always. Thank you to the OLLI program, our sponsor, the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. A special thank you to Grayson Simmons for his great skill in making the technology work behind the scenes. To Steve Benson also for finding and booking our tremendous, amazing speakers. To Carmi Blafus for keeping us organized, and to Kate Schaefers and Brianna Smith for their outstanding guidance and leadership of our OLLI program. This concludes our At the U series for this year, but please join us next spring for another fascinating look at what faculty and staff at the U are working on. Thank you so much and have a wonderful summer.
And thank you, Laura.
You're welcome. Bye.
Thank you.